President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, commemorated the Day of Loyalty and Love to Chavez during a meeting with governors and mayors of the Great Patriotic Pole. This Wednesday marks the 49th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Cuba and the Caribbean community. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said Wednesday that he was returning to Addis Ababa from the battlefront after the National Defense Force claimed major advances in the fight against Tigrayan rebels. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the TeleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, commemorated the Day of Loyalty and Love to Chavez during a meeting with governors and mayors of the Great Patriotic Pole elected last November 21st. The head of state remembered when, on December 8, 2012, President Chavez went in national TV to the country. The message was clear: choose Nicolás Maduro to preserve the Bolivarian Revolution. Maduro emphasized that 9 years after Major Hugo Chávez's last speech, the people have risked their lives for their loyalty to the Bolivarian project, even in the midst of the most adverse circumstances.
Later, Venezuela can say the Bolivarian Revolution is alive, standing, victorious, riding the times of this 21st century towards the years to come, towards the decades to see Victor riding.
The president of our digital multi-platform TeleSUR, Patricia Villegas, highlighted the arduous task that had to face President Hugo Chavez after the destabilization attempts that current President Nicolás Maduro is now assuming.
Understanding of Commander Chavez of who should take the reins of the country in the same instant of it something happened as finally happened, and obviously choosing Nicolás Maduro is to choose the new subject of the attacks. It is no longer just the Commander Chavez who is still being sick, receive ruthless attacks of all kinds. If we also said the figures to whom he hands over the flags of a whole movement constructed, that if one part of the intervention and the other without doubt is what you mentioned, the unity.
Uruguay's National Electoral Court confirmed on Wednesday that there will be a referendum next year against the law of urgent consideration, a neoliberal cornerstone of the administration of current President Luis Lacalle, which has been fiercely condemned by broad sectors of the country. The court validated over 670,000 signatures, or 25% of the electoral roll, thus achieving the minimum number required to call for a referendum that seeks to repeal 135 articles of the law. Authorities must set a date for the referendum within 120 calendar days, likely to be held between March and April next year. The urgent consideration law is a neoliberal legislation that promotes budget cuts in the public sector, supports the privatization of public companies, and restricts the right to strike of the workers, among other setbacks. It has sparked major protests and strike action in the country. Analysts note the referendum could serve as a sort of plebiscite on the Lacalle administration. Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso has survived another scandal after a majority of the country's legislature voted against a recommendation to impeach him following the Pandora Papers revelations. In a highly polarized hours-long session on Tuesday, the Assembly instead voted to request that Lasso appear before the National Assembly to answer questions about his offshore dealings. The legislature also voted to refer a commission report to the National Prosecutor, the Controller's Office, the Internal Revenue Services, the Financial Investigation Unit, and the Superintendency of Banks to look into whether Lasso's links to companies and trusts in offshore tax havens violated the law. Hours before Tuesday's vote, Ecuador's National Controller's Office announced it would drop a separate investigation into the president's offshore dealings, citing a lack of evidence linking Lasso to offshore companies at the time he filed his presidential candidacy. In response, President Lasso announced that he would not appear before Parliament, as the case against him was effectively dismissed. And the Brazilian Senate began debates on Wednesday on legislation that would legalize land grabbing, posing a further threat to the Amazon and indigenous territories. The bill under study by the Federal Senate legalizes illegal. It regularizes criminally appropriated lands and processes that often include violent acts against indigenous peoples and traditional communities. More than 200 applications have been registered with Brazilian authorities for commercial exploitation on areas of indigenous lands, and the land theft is repeated in environmental reserves. The bill has been rejected by social and political movements as well as by indigenous and rural communities, stressing it will only benefit big landowners and corporations that illegally occupy Amazonian territories. In Honduras, a recount of some of the ballots from last month's congressional elections continues after the Electoral Authority received allegations of fraud and inconsistencies at some of the ballot boxes. The vote verification and counting process, which began this Tuesday, is being carried out on the votes cast in more than 2,500 ballot boxes. 52 verification boards, members of political organizations, national and international overseers, and officials from the Public Prosecutor's Office are participating in the process. The National Electoral Council authorities pointed out that there will be sanctions for those who have altered the polling tally sheets, mainly for those who acted as election officers at polling stations or in the process of vote counting. The recount is one of the measures adopted in response to complaints about irregularities in the ballot records following the general elections of November 28th. The United States Department of Treasury sanctioned 2 of Nayib Bukele's government officials for alleged acts of corruption. The director of El Salvador prison system, Osiris Luna, heads the list of officials that the United States government has included in the list of the global Magnitsky Law. The report from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, of the Treasury Department establishes that the officers directed, organized, and facilitated covert negotiations and meetings of the criminal organization MS-13 with high-level penalty facilities. Together with Luna, his mother Alma Yanira Mesa, and the director of reconstruction of the social tissue, Carlos Amilcar Marroquin, are sanctioned. We'll be right back after this very short break. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to From the South. This Wednesday marks the 49th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Cuba and the Caribbean community. Relations between Cuba and CARICOM member states Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago were established on December 8, 1972. The historic move opened the path to a friendly and fruitful relationship between Cuba and fellow Caribbean nations that has evolved over the years into a mutually beneficial partnership based on solidarity. In a statement honoring the date, the chairman of the Caribbean Community and Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, highlighted the excellent spirit of cooperation that has been of great assistance, both bilaterally and regionally, particularly in regards to human capacity building and the provision of health care. And honoring the 49th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Cuba and CARICOM, General Secretary of the Caribbean Movement for Peace and Integration and President of the Cuban-Barbadian Friendship Association, David Denny, thanked Cuba for its support in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic.
First, let me say to the government and people of Cuba, thanks for saving many lives in our region, because many of our countries are suffering from this COVID-19 situation, and Cuba have extended its arms to assist us medically and to help to save many of the lives in our region.
The president of the Cuban-Barbadian Friendship Association also condemned the United States attacks on the Cuban government and people.
The Cuban-Barbadian Friendship Association also want to object to the brutal attacks against the government and people of Cuba by right-wing and reactionary forces in the United States of America and also the United States of America government.
Jamaica's Attorney General confirmed that work has started to make the Caribbean island a republic, with an announcement expected by the end of the second quarter of 2022. Attorney General Marlene Malahu Forte explained that a document is currently being prepared for the Prime Minister on the matter, who has already given instructions for the Constitution to be amended. Barbados recently became the world's newest republic by removing Britain's Queen Elizabeth II as head of state and inaugurating a president on the 55th anniversary of its independence. Analysts noted the move could lead other former British colonies to take the same step. While former Jamaican prime ministers have made commitments to start the process for the past 4 decades, nothing substantial has happened. However, following Barbados' move, calls became louder by Jamaicans, including former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson, who wrote an open letter to Prime Minister Andrew Holness and the leader of the opposition, calling on them to ensure that Jamaica is a republic by the time the country observes 60 years of independence in 2022. Well, the World Health Organization announced Wednesday that early data indicates the Omicron variant of COVID-19 may more easily reinfect people who have already had the virus or been vaccinated than previous variants, but could also cause milder disease.
Africa suggests increased risk of reinfection with Omicron, but more data are needed to draw firmer conclusions. There is also some evidence that Omicron causes milder disease than Delta. But again, it's still too early to be definitive.
As well as that, more transmissible does not mean more virulent or more lethal. Yes, if we allow the virus to transmit unchecked, it will generate more. We saw that with Delta before and with other variants. If they're allowed to spread unchecked, even though they're not individually more virulent or lethal, they just generate more cases, they put pressure on the health system, and more people die. That's what we can avoid.
And Uganda has confirmed its first case of the Omicron COVID-19 variant as the vaccination drive continues. The virus was detected in 7 travelers from South Africa and Nigeria who arrived at Entebbe International Airport on November 29th and are currently in isolation. Those affected were said to display only mild symptoms. The arrival of the new variant has driven some previously vaccine-hesitant Ugandans to get a jab, fearing the country could return to the scenes witnessed during the second wave of the pandemic. Around 7.6 million vaccine doses have been administered in Uganda since the rollout began in early 2021. The confirmation of Omicron cases in the country means the new variant has been found in at least 9 African nations.
Not so much like it used to be when the pandemic had just arrived in our country, because there are few cases and they are not being admitted because they are saying it's not severe like the way it used to be.
I didn't vaccinate from the first start, so today I decided to come because of the new COVID. After getting to hear the news of the new variants, I decided to vaccinate so that I don't get the COVID, the new COVID.
As a Ugandan, I'm not worried as such because it is a variant of corona. We know the processes of how to stop its spread and to avoid it. You have to follow the SOPs as we've already been told. Social distancing, wearing masks, and sanitizing and washing hands. So those are the basic things that we have to follow. And I think they go all along whatever variant it is. And fortunately, we've even been told by reports that actually its effects are not as adverse as even the Delta variant. So I don't think there's so much cause for alarm. It is something that we can handle as long as we follow all the SOPs and get vaccinated.
There's more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said Wednesday that he was returning to Addis Ababa from the battlefront after the National Defense Force claimed major advances in the fight against Tigrayan rebels. The government on Monday said the strategic towns of Dessie and Kombolcha had been retaken from the Tigray People's Liberation Front after fears that the capital could be overtaken last month sparked the Prime Minister to announce he would head to the battlefront, handing over his regular duties to his deputy. In recent days, the government has announced a recapture of several small towns, including the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Lalibela. The TPLF has dismissed the government's claims, saying the rebels were making strategic withdrawals and remained undefeated. Meanwhile, the international community continues to call for a ceasefire. Sudan's top general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has warned against any foreign interference in the country's internal affairs. The general, who led a coup against the transitional government of the country in October, accused diplomatic missions of encouraging a revolt against the Sudanese defense forces in order to meddle in the nation's internal affairs, claiming that such incitement has destabilized the country, which is already in the grip of violent protests. In past rounds of demonstrations, security forces violently repressed protesters, including by firing live ammunition, according to activists. The general reinstated ousted interim Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok last month amid international pressure in a deal that calls for an independent technocratic cabinet under military oversight.
We must prepare and work hard to prepare the country for the elections promised for July 2023. This election requires the creation of an environment of freedom, peace, and security. We are all watching the political scene and unfortunately see that a number of diplomatic envoys are circulating among citizens and are clearly trying to incite the people to turn against the armed forces in order to seize the opportunity of interfering in Sudanese affairs. We warn them, these diplomats, against this kind of behavior and tell them that we can clearly see them and will not hesitate to take actions against anyone committing violations against the security and sanctity of Sudan or against anything related to this country.
Libya's upper house on Wednesday proposed delaying the December presidential elections by 2 months in the latest dispute over the vote intended to help end 10 years of conflict and violence. The United Nations-led political process with a plan for elections on December 24th has been undermined by bitter divisions over the legal basis for the vote and who should be allowed to run, with a string of controversial figures stepping forward. The High Council of State, which is equivalent to a Senate, suggested the presidential vote could take place in February to avoid further threatening the country's political transition. The council, based in the western city of Tripoli, has been in disagreement over electoral laws with a rival body, the House of Representatives, based in the eastern city of Tobruk, in a nation violently divided since the 2011 NATO-led intervention and assassination of leader Muammar Gaddafi. In October, the eastern-based body said the legislative ballot had been delayed from December 24th to January, but the United Nations mission has urged leaders to stick to this month's date for both presidential and legislative ballots. Russian President Vladimir Putin, speaking publicly for the first time since his high-profile talks with his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden, said Wednesday that Moscow reserves the right to defend its security as Ukraine continues its military build-up on the border and NATO expands its military encirclement of Russia.
NATO bloc to the east, including at the expenses of Ukraine. This is one of the key questions in preserving Russia's security in the medium and even strategic perspective. We have been talking about this all the time in public and have been warning our partners that for us, NATO expansion is unacceptable. Russia has a peaceful foreign policy but has the right to defend its security. NATO infrastructure has been inevitably getting closer to our borders, and now we see missile defense systems in Poland and Romania, and we have every reason to believe that the same will happen if Ukraine is admitted to NATO, but then it will be already on Ukraine territory. Well, how can we not think about it? It would be just a criminal inaction on our part to simply watch it happening.
The Russian Defense Ministry published images showing French warplanes escorted by Russian jets above the Black Sea in a move that is not uncommon but comes amid escalating tensions between the West and Russia. Russia sent military aircraft to intercept and escort the 3 French fighter jets that were carrying out a NATO observation mission in international airspace. The operation took place professionally without representing any danger or hindering the mission of the French planes of their freedom of navigation in international airspace, an Army spokesman stated. After the Olympic boycott, the president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, highlighted that his sports celebration is not a political character and will accept the decision taken by each athlete.
Full focus, on the athletes. The games are about and for the athletes, and therefore you will hear the same comment from us for every political decision from any government. We have been concerned with the athletes. We welcome that they can participate, that they are supported by their national governments, and the rest is politics, and our political neutrality, the principle is applied.
We've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.